This is Tim Albright with a Tech Talk from TV Technology. With me today to talk about migrating from SDI to AV over IP, Mr. Dan Maloney from Matrox. Welcome, sir.
How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm well. I am well. So let's start talking for a second, really quickly. Over the last probably 4, 5, 10 years, the broadcast side of the industry has started migrating from SDI to more of an IP-based infrastructure. Talk for a second to somebody who hasn't quite made that leap, hasn't made that switch yet. Why would somebody make that move?
Well, there's a few reasons, and it all depends on your motivation. Where some of those that started the move were started to investigate how they would move to migrate to 4K. They were investigating 4K, and they were saying, well, it's time for me do I rewire everything with 12G SDI, or maybe we should be investigating an IP. Is there maybe a way that I could take advantage of IP workflows? If I'm going to make this investment again, let me make sure I'm making the right one. And this was one of the motivations for the industry and its customers, who primarily the broadcasters, saying, we're tired of being on this hamster wheel. We're always upgrading every 5 years, new hardware. Maybe we can find a new way of doing that, and IP could be the answer. And I'll get into that a little bit, but why people are looking at it, potentially it's because they're looking to make another major reinvestment, and they're looking around to see what's the best solution for them. And one of the main motivations is, space of equipment and cost, or the size of cables. IP is installed already throughout the facilities quite a bit, and it's a fiber, and even RJ45 is a lot smaller in weight, smaller in cost, smaller, easier to route. And those big switchers that you put, the SDI switchers are giant. When you look at an IP switcher, it could be much more dense. So just from a space and rack space, you think that's a small factor, but it's not. That's also one motivating factor, particularly in some specific installations. Next one would be, so this is at the C level, the corporate, at the executive level. Some organizations don't understand why they need two engineering organizations within a media company. Why do I need broadcast engineering and network engineering? Why can't I consolidate all my brains in one one department, and have those guys that are doing all the signal routing be the same set of guys? I don't want to manage two completely different sets of engineering. So that's one of the motivations for organization to look at an IP organization. You have consolidation of your expertise under one department, so to speak. Finally, people who are a bit more future looking will say, broadcast engineering used to be at the forefront of technology because general purpose enterprise technology was quite a bit behind. You needed the specialty hardware and software that the broadcast equipment vendors were creating. But now enterprise technology is far has overcome and continues to invest much more broadly, widely than broadcast engineering equipment vendors could ever. So the compute horsepower, the bandwidth, it's only going to continue accelerating. So now enterprise technology is really capable of moving media, creating media. So if you're a bit forward-looking and you're investing in new technology, maybe an enterprise technology might be the best way to go. So a lot there, but there's quite a few reasons why IP might be the future for media production.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong here. One of the things you hit on there was the cost savings, right? And not just the ginormous SDI switches, but when you move from an HD SDI signal flow into more of the 12G for 4K, you're moving into 3 cables at that point, right? And so you've got the additional cost of the copper plus the additional cost of the switches. And so I believe one of the cost savings there is simply the infrastructure itself, right?
Well, that's it. It's hard to, again, there's a lot of different equations. Would you just move from an HD production to over SDI to HD productions in IP? How quickly will you get your return on savings? Well, if you've got an existing installation the math doesn't necessarily jive as if you're motivated to move for other reasons. Because, as I said, you might be moving to 4K, or you might have a new greenfield installation. But absolutely, the potential for cost reductions is great, not only in equipment, but also in trying to find staffing. Staffing is always a problem. And moving forward, schools are churning out network engineers to no end. I mean, there's a good network engineer is hard to find. But I'll tell you, a good broadcast engineer is even harder to find. So there's both the capital expenditure of the hardware, but also the continuous expenditure of service agreements with those. I mean, you get Dell or Cisco service agreements. You already have them in your facility for your enterprise part of your business. Why not capitalize on some of those service agreements on your broadcast operations side of things as well?
Yeah.
Also, similarly with the staff that you've got on hand, it might be easier to keep some network engineers on staff to help with some of the problem versus the more and more rarefied field of high-end broadcast engineers.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly, you guys, Matrox has a product called Convert IP. It is standards based, which is important. The products themselves, though, I find fascinating here that it is both encoders and decoders depending on the situation and where you have the physical hardware. Talk for a second though about what exactly is Convert IP.
Well, it's a suite of, as the name implies, converters. Now, in those converters, you can actually also put encoders, but not all of IP. You can have IP that's, and primarily 2110 to date, has been a deployment of uncompressed signals. So you would convert SDI or HDMI to IP and from IP. So these converters do bidirectional. You can go in, transmitters and receivers to and from IP, from SDI or HDMI. These converters also offer a couple of codecs if you wanted. And why you want to look at codecs primarily is to reduce the bandwidth. Sometimes if you want to deploy widely your signals, it might be better to run that on either on copper because that's much less expensive. But even running fiber, if you can run a lot less, you have a lot less data. If you're reducing, say, 10-to-1 your compression ratio, you can run 10 times more signals on the same switch, so to speak, if you reduce that payload. Of course, these devices are first and foremost of extremely low latency, so we're talking lines of latency for the conversion or the compression versus frames of latency, which is a typical codec. And quality, well, we're really trying to consider it as either completely uncompressed, which is zero quality loss, but even when you do compress it, it's not meant for distribution. This is extremely high quality, either JPEG XS, or we have a Pro AV codec that we also offer that is meant to keep the quality at visibly lossless, suitable for live productions. So that's the suite of the converters. And in 2110, today's market, the single greatest need would be to monitor your 2110 signals if you have a 2110 plant today. So these devices are a perfect form factor just to put behind a monitor so that you can monitor any of your 2110 signals on any HDMI monitor throughout your facility. And that's one of the easiest and fastest markets for us to address is a monitoring market with this device. But again, you want to convert SDI camera signals that it might be strewn throughout your facility. You can do that. And again, there's more specialty applications where you may want to do some compression and running the content on RJ45 1 gigabit networks.
Yeah. You gave us a couple of different options there, but in your mind, where do you see the biggest opportunity for IP infrastructure?
The first guys to migrate to 2110 was in the OB trucks.
Okay.
The OB trucks were like one of and I touched on two things: is space savings of moving from IP. A 4RU or a 3RU network switch replaces a full height rack of SDI routing. The weight of the cables in an OB van, I don't remember the statistics, but let's say it's, you're reducing from 500 pounds or 800 pounds of copper to, a handful of pounds of fiber. And so in the OB vans, they've already migrated quite substantially into the 2110 space. Greenfield construction, again, a brand new broadcast facility where he hasn't routed anything. Instead of having huge pipes of SDI being, fed between floors, um, you're already setting up your network infrastructure for your enterprise operations. It's very easy at that point to run the same fibers throughout the facility for your media operations, and it becomes all part of the same installation. So greenfield or new installations could really benefit from going straight to an IP workflow versus going with SDI only to in the future move to IP, because it is definitely the path forward. And finally, again, the migration to 4K. If you're going to make a major reinvestment because your vision mixers, your cameras are going to be upgraded to 4K, it might be worthwhile to also say, well, the same type of fiber can run HD and 4K or 8K. The switches they're either not future proof. You do migrate up to switches, but you'll go to 40 gig or 100 gig switches very rapidly. But the underlying architecture is the very same architecture you would be using today with today's 2110 implementation. So if you're going to make a major reinvestment, these are the most obvious applications for those that should be considering video over IP today. I mean, look, fact is, video over IP is being used extensively with protocols like NDI or other H.264 IP cameras contributing through IP links. We're talking about now is live production in the live production environments. Broadcast environments is the last bastion of those that really haven't migrated. I mean, content creation, in the post-production world, they've been doing, IP, based creation for 10 years now. But live production is the last base, and that's where we're finally seeing the movement in these markets, applications I just mentioned.
Yeah. You mentioned new installations, greenfield places where there aren't any cabling done yet. Talk for a second about how easy it is to convert from standard SDI in those folks. In other words, you mentioned upgrading. How easy is that conversion from standard SDI delivery to a video over IP system?
It's a new tech, so there's a certainly new skill set to be understood. But if you look at an SDI router, you still needed some type of control system to be able to control those routes. Well, it's a little bit what we're talking about now with these SDI to IP converters, or once you get into the IP domain, it's all about identifying the signal on your network. How do I route it? So there's a new set of software required, and you have to understand how networking works in general, how MDNS discovery works. So, I have a new signal on the network. How can I then identify that and route it? We use an open standard with our devices called NMOS. That's an open set of APIs, and that greatly facilitates this. You don't have to be remembering IP addresses. NMOS has a protocol that allows you to announce yourself on a network. So I'm here. I'm a new signal, and this is my profile. I'm a receiver, and I can receive this type of signals, HD or 4K. And then you have the routing capability. Once you have a receiver that says, okay, what signal do you want me to listen to? You don't have to punch in IP addresses. You just say, oh, I want to pick that guy that's announced himself. He's named himself, television camera 1, and I'm going to listen to camera 1 now. I'm going to listen to camera 2 now. So new sets of tools. So any new time there's new tools, there are some new skills required, but it's no different than having to learn an SDI workflow, with the added benefit that the underlying network technology is well understood. It's very well understood by many in the market. We're just building software on top of that.
Really quickly, because you mentioned a couple of things there. Number one is how easy is that setup to say, I'm a receiver. I want to listen to to that setup, that camera, or that signal over there. How easy is that, and is that primarily the domain of the broadcast engineer, the network engineer, or is there a hybrid person there that we're not completely familiar with yet?
Well, I think there'll be both. There'll be a bit of both. Let's say the person in charge of making sure the video is clean and looking good, and he's getting the right signal. Well, he'll be the one that's using the broadcast controller, so to speak. And
Okay.
actually, Matrox will be providing one of it in association with our Convert IP. We will be offering a broadcast control we call Conduct IP. And it's just that it's a piece of software that's installed on a server somewhere, and the devices are discovered, and you could link them. So that broadcast controller would be operated by one of the operations personnel, ensuring that when devices are plugged in, and that the switches are the firewalls are properly configured, and that the partition, like the way the routing, making sure subnets are correctly set up. You have to make sure that if you have devices between subnets that they can talk to each other, and there's certainly a level of network engineering that has to be understood as well, because and now in particular with security being so important for so many people, the default position on a network is be safe, be conservative. And then when you start plugging things in, well, the broadcast engineer is going to be talking to the network engineer, or the broadcast operator will be talking to the network engineer, say, here's why I installed my devices, let's just make sure my devices can see each other. Once the network engineer opens up the correct pathways, then you're off, then the software kicks in, and discovery and routing becomes a breeze.
We're talking to Dan Maloney from Matrox here about AV over IP. Dan, one last question here on the network side. What is the impact of Convert IP on the network, and what sort of security have you guys run into in support of those network engineers?
Well, so our devices are there's what we call media ports and configuration or data ports, control ports. One of the ways you log into our devices is through a standard web page, and well, that's all has to be HTTPS encrypted communication, so secure, secure in that standpoint. And one of the benefits of doing it this way is your media network, which tends to be sacrosanct, it could end up being, ultimately gapped. There is no connection to the outside world, but you can have control port that would be on your more the less strict, or could have a certain amount of provisions put in there, so that the devices can talk to each other with the broadcast controller saying, okay, the signal's on this port on the media network, please send them to this receiver, or vice versa. This receiver, please listen to this. And you can do that having things completely gapped. You don't have to do that. We can have all the media and control through a single network, but in our experience, you give the tools, and you let those that are more favorable for flexible and easy installation, they can go ahead and do that with a single connection. Or those that say, no, because of security concerns, I really need to have independent control and media, we can offer that. I mean, we even offer power over Ethernet on our network jacks, so that the RJ45 jacks. So you can get, 3 signals: your power signal, your control signal, and your media signal off a single, network jack, and then just have your HDMI feed your monitor. Again, very easy if you want it to be easy, but could be highly secure if necessary. I mean, and the last point, when it comes to security, sometimes reliability goes on hand in hand, and all of our Convert IPs, or the majority of our Convert IPs, have a fully redundant network jack as well, a media jack, so that you could run completely independent parallel signals across your network. This is using the SMPTE 2022-7 protocol, which means if packets or the signal gets dropped using one path, the second path takes it immediately without a hit in the signal at all. So again, we have quite a few network jacks on our boxes, simply because we want to be able to offer the maximum flexibility to our customers for how they want to operate that.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about some of the cost savings of migrating from a standard SDI system into IP, but when you look at the overall ROI, which is obviously when you're talking to the CTO, you're talking to the CIO, you're talking to the head of facilities, they're looking at this. What is the real full ROI of most installations that go to IP?
Well, like I said, if it's a pure just swap out, ROI is pretty much even. But if you start looking at a little bit more, long-term capital expenditures, having a single machine room for your ultimately just end up being PCs. It's been a while that most broadcast equipment is still running on PCs, but now your switches and your servers are running software, and your networks all in the same room. There's not distributed. The opportunity to consolidate your engineering department, your skill set to operate one set of equipment, and then you just have specialized operators that are just talking about the software, but the hardware and the infrastructure is managed by one group. And then again, the service contracts for this hardware and this infrastructure that's installed, you don't have separate service contracts for your broadcast equipment versus your network, your enterprise equipment. It's one set of contracts with Dell, with Cisco's, that are going to be servicing that, and then specialty software operators are just accessing that through very standard interfaces on their own computers. So those are the very top level kind of cost savings that a CEO and a CIO would be most interested in understanding.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Dan, as we wrap up here, where else do you see Convert IP being deployed? You talked a little bit about some live events, obviously, the trucks rolling out and covering events. Where else do you see Convert IP being utilized?
Well, Convert IP's got it's a SIP 2110 capable device, but it also includes a new upcoming standard. It's built upon ST 2110 and NMOS, which is called IPMX, and that standard has slightly reduced timing requirements on the network side, so more modest type network equipment can easily process this, as well as I mentioned, JPEG XS is one of the codecs. There could be other codecs involved in the IPMX standard, and what that will allow you to do is, if you some installations that don't need the types of stringent network implementations found on 2110 could adopt this new IPMX, which is a great open standard format. And so those would be places like venues for concerts or stadiums. So you're not broadcasting, but you're still doing a fairly significant media creation tool. Concert halls, school auditoriums and sports fields, even houses of worship. Houses of worship have some quite sophisticated broadcast operations, but their in-house, media operations could all benefit from a pure network base, but they don't want to compromise on quality and want to make sure, it's just like routed, the same experience from a quality standpoint as SDI, but with the added benefit of being in the IP world, more software tools available to them and more standardized equipment. So anywhere where there's media, live media being used, and there's a lot of places now doing that, this is where this equipment could be used.
All right, Dan Maloney from Matrox, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing that as we make our rounds to the various trade shows. Dan, somebody wants to connect with you, somebody wants to connect with Matrox, and they want to find out more about Convert IP. How do they do that?
Well, there's a number of ways nowadays. The website is matrox.com/video. Twitter is @matroxvideo. And then LinkedIn and YouTube, just search up Matrox and you can get information on there.
Thank you so much, Dan Maloney from Matrox. Check them out. For us at TV Technology, go to tvtechnology.com. That's tvtechnology.com. We will find this and other TV Tech Talks. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. This is Tim Albright with another Tech Talk.